All right, good morning, everyone. Good to see everybody again. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Josh, can you do the roll call, please?
Yes, good morning. Rachel Arizmendi,
Present.
Ashley Boren, Don Bransford. Ooh, I like the glasses. Don Cameron. Here. Nancy Cassidy.
Present.
Helene Dillard. Mike Gallo. Here. Crystal Haling. Eric Holst. Jeff Huckabee. Bryce Lumberg. Martha Montoya. Joyce Sterling. Andy Thulin. Chris Valadez.
Here.
Mr. President, we have quorum.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, we'll move on to the minutes. We need to approve the minutes from September 5th.
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So moved. Okay, departmental updates. Secretary Ross.
Because it's been so long since we've been together, get ready for a really long one, but I'm going to talk really fast so we can get to our really excellent presentations today. So I tried to remember why I felt so tired, and then I looked at my calendar for September and October. So I'm just going to race through this, and when you hear something, make a note so I can clarify it for you later. So right after the last meeting, Josh and I went to my National Association meeting, which was in Albuquerque this year. The ag commissioner there was the current president of NASDA. And at that meeting, we passed our national policy for climate smart agriculture. It's actually a policy on agriculture adaptation and resiliency, and had great support from ag commissioners across the country. It passed unanimously. And it was extremely valuable that the whole Northeastern coalition of folks voted to support it the day before, because they liked that it was something positive about all the ways that agriculture is part of the solution. We spent a lot of time talking about food safety at that meeting, and now I'm the chair of the Food Safety Committee for the National Association, which means Natalie is very busy supporting me on all of that. Later in September, I had the opportunity to speak at the Global Food Summit, which was one of the side events at National Climate Week. That was a really enlightening session, and learned a lot. It's very seldom that I go to speak at something and I get to be there for the whole day, so it was a great networking opportunity. Obviously, Joy's not here today, but she was with us on the trade mission to Mexico, and our lieutenant governor just provided such great leadership. If you haven't had a chance to meet her, I would really encourage us perhaps to do a dinner or lunch where we could meet with her, because she is taking a leading role. The governor, in his wisdom, asked her to lead issues on international trade and diplomacy types of things, and her years as an ambassador make her such a great spokesperson for all of us. Unfortunately, we did have power shutdowns, numerous ones. Learned a lot. I'm hopeful to start meeting with some of our friends in food processing. In particular, the timing of this was at the end of some food processing further south in the valley, but right in the heart of other food processing and rice drying. And I think when we talk about resiliency, we really need to look at all the ways we can support people with even more sustainable backup plans. I like to say microgrid, but then you all know that before I moved to this state, I represented rural electric cooperatives and public power districts. Anyone? So I'm just saying, I think it really suggests that we need to look at everything, and obviously the governor, by naming his cabinet secretary as the energy czar, all things will be on the table. I am happy to report that VND, I hate to say this out loud in a public meeting, but it has been over 60 days since our last find. All of the testing we're doing now is surveillance to make sure we can continue to declare free from. So I just, kudos to our state veterinarian and everybody in our animal health division. They've been doing rotations to go down there for 2 weeks at a time for a year and a half, and great partnership with USDA. I can't stress enough how our programs on both the pest side and on the animal side would not be possible without that strong working relationship and those partnerships. We are standing up our citrus division, and Victoria Hornbecker is our division director for the citrus program. I see that Brian is here from CalCan. We had a really informative tour. We had about 10 people from multiple agencies that did a climate smart agriculture tour. So some of our colleagues who hear Jenny and me talk about this all the time, we went to a dairy farm. We saw the elevator taking the dried poop down to put it into compost piles. This is my life, and I love it. But see, Erin was in sustainability for the dairy sector nationally, so she and I can get very excited about all the ways we can turn that what was a waste product into other revenue streams and really capture those nutrient values. And then we went to an almond orchard and listened to the dad and his daughter talk about the things they're doing on SWEEP as well as Healthy Soils programs. So it was a very good day. We've been putting a lot of hours in on the water resiliency portfolio, and I'm very hopeful that within the next couple of weeks we will have a draft out for public comment. So stay tuned for that. Had the great experience of traveling with our first partner who has taken an interest in California food for California kids. That's our Farm to Fork office and the work that we're doing with school nutrition directors. Our first trip was going to, there's Joy, she made it. Our first trip was actually scheduled to Yolo County on the day that the power was out everywhere. So that one is being rescheduled. I won't be able to travel with her next week, but she wants to go there to Yolo County because a lot of people put a lot of work in to host her. We had an unbelievable day in Turlock. They are one of the first school systems that went all in on centralized kitchen, improving the offerings of lunches. They have a 10-acre farm that they use not only for ag career technical education, but culinary career technical education. And those young chefs, when they stood at attention to introduce the food that they were serving from menus that they created from ingredients that came from that farm, I melted like a big marshmallow, because I am when I see the students. And then we went to the second grade to see they've just expanded their school garden, so each class has its own school box that they do the plantings in, they do the artwork for, they capture things that they've learned from that. And then we went to see how they serve their lunches with the choices that they're doing. And every high school student stopped except one girl. I was looking, one girl who took pizza and no vegetable and no fruit. But their experience over 15 years is they've tremendously increased the participation in their lunches, so they're getting their full federal reimbursement. The reason I'm so passionate about this is that all meals served in schools on an annual basis, breakfast, snacks, lunches, suppers, after-school programs, 1 billion meals. And if we could increase California grown and give our kids better nutrition with it and expose them to all these possibilities, what an awesome thing that could be. So here we are, folks. We're going to keep talking about it. We had the pleasure a few weeks ago of dedicating a plaque that will get hung someday, but we have to wait for DGS to be able to do that. My friend and predecessor, Bill Lyons, came over. We celebrated 100 years. And I got to talk about, Mike, you will appreciate this, because I just did a really quick run through of our history of 100 years. One of the first functions of the department when it was created was to step in and weigh in on the use of the term oleomargin. It's not butter, it's oleomargin. And it just felt like, given some of the discussions we're having about terminology in the dairy sector, it felt like, and nothing changes in 100 years, does it? So thank you for that. Had a great meeting, and Martha, thank you for joining us when we met with the ambassador for Colombia. Wonderful person. I think he'll be here in January, February. He's very interested in talking to our multi-generation farm families about the crops that can be grown in Colombia, so I look forward to working with him. And then last two things, the chlorpyrifos work group that was announced back in May began its work. They've had a couple of conference calls, and then they had a 2-day working session earlier this month. Hopeful that we'll have recommendations from that work group early in the quarter of 2020. And Arturo and I traveled to Imperial County last week to meet with the assemblymen and visit their fairgrounds and get a better understanding of what the tremendous needs are for fairgrounds. Yes, Joy, including and especially broadband. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Secretary.
Other than that, kind of a slow couple.
A slow month, huh? I hate to see your frequent flyer miles. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up for public comment. Do things a little different today to accommodate some people. So if you have public comment, please step up and make yourself known.
Good morning, Secretary Ross and Board President Cameron and members of the board. I'm Brian Little with California Farm Bureau Federation. I handle labor and employment policy issues for California Farm Bureau, and we wanted to come here today, I wanted to come here today to bring your attention to an issue that's developing at Cal OSHA and at the Cal OSHA Standards Board that has caused us some significant concern about the way that a particular regulation they're working on, the direction that it seems to be developing. We have been raising this issue to everyone we can find who will be willing to listen to us. And we have been involved from the very beginning as stakeholders in this issue since it first cropped up in 2015. Let me emphasize to start with that agricultural employers are very interested and work very diligently to protect all of the employees who work for them. We want to send everyone home at the end of every day, at least as safe and healthy as they were when they got to us at the beginning of the day. There's no reason for an agricultural employer to ever want to not be concerned about the safety and health of their employees. One of the things that's changed a lot in agriculture in the 10, 11 years now that I've been at California Farm Bureau has been the growing adoption of the use of night harvesting in agriculture. And if you go and you watch night harvesting occur in just about any segment of the industry, you're going to see as much lighting provided as is practical to do. You're going to see heavy use of high visibility clothing in order to, and a lot of training and other things like that going on to make sure that employees can work together safely, can work safely around equipment, and again, be able to finish their work time in as good a condition as they were when they got there at the beginning of their work day. The regulation that Cal OSHA is working on right now is asking agricultural employers to do some things that we think are going to be very difficult and impractical to do in a lot of places. Provision of light powered by generators, gasoline powered, diesel powered, whatever the case might be, are going to raise issues with CARB and our local air quality management boards. The provision of light at night in agricultural fields will raise issues with local light ordinances and other similar types of local laws and ordinances. And up to this point, we've had difficulty getting the agency to be responsive to these concerns. We would appreciate in whatever way you feel like you have the ability to be able to express an interest and concern in this, and we'd be happy to help you get a little more information about what the problems are that have been related to the way this has been handled. And we would very much appreciate any interest you might be able to show in helping us to better manage this process. Thanks for your time.
Hi, my name is Michael Miller. I'm with the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. I want to speak just generally to this regulation and how it affects wine grape growers in California. As you know, grapes are harvested at night. So to the effect that you have a regulation dealing with lighting at night for ag work is a big deal for growers. This regulation will likely end ag work at night because of how it's written. We have no problem with the intent of the regulation. Our growers work diligently to provide a safe environment for workers. We want them to have the light necessary to do the job, and we work hard to make that happen. I want to echo Brian's comments. And in fact, many aspects of the proposed regulation are already in place. The use of vest, the lighting, head lighting, hand lighting, lighting from the tractors, from the harvesters, all that is already there, and we're doing that. The problem with this specific regulation is that it requires area lighting. So for a vineyard, if you've got a vineyard that has roads that go up and down a hill, that wind and bend, you're gonna have to put up several light towers to provide that lighting necessary at 30 inches above the floor of the vineyard. That's gonna be a real challenge for many growers. For example, in Monterey County, they have a very strong and strict light ordinance, what you can do outside for lighting. We had a grower who had a break-in of a shed in Monterey. He put up a safety light outside the shed. Monterey County made him take it down. So if you can't put up a safety light outside a shed, there's no way that they're gonna approve 6 or 7 light towers in a vineyard. In other counties, it's gonna be issues of air regulation and noise, as well as just dealing with neighbors who don't want that at night in their neighborhoods. So it's a really big issue for us. Additionally, if this regulation goes forward and we aren't able to harvest at night, this is gonna have a ripple effect on the wineries. The wineries that accept the grapes during the day will have grapes that are coming in at a higher temperature. They're gonna have to cool those grapes, and they're gonna be buying the electricity for that cooling at a level of high peak energy usage. So they're gonna be paying a premium price for that electricity as well. So the ripple effect of the industry is not good. So again, to Brian's point, we just wanna bring this to your attention. We stand ready to assist you in any way that you might want to engage. If you do like to engage, please let us know. We're here to help. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
How long has night harvesting been going on?
Well, I actually asked that question this morning, and the answer I got was decades. It's been going on for a long, long time, but I couldn't get an actual real number. Yeah.
And is the area lighting being requested by the workers?
So the way lighting is done right now, and we think that this is adequate lighting in talking with the board and talking with the workers. They have headlamps, they have flashlights, they have lights that are mounted on the tractors and on the harvesters, and that goes with them throughout the work. One of the problems with this regulation is that it doesn't state exactly when the lighting needs to be provided. So if you're doing a vineyard harvest and you're doing this block of one night, you may have to light up that entire block for the entire night, which would be a huge number of towers and lighting.
Yeah, I realize, I've been, farming grapes 38 years, and it's always been at night.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time. Bryce? Oh, sorry, Ashley?
I just wonder, can you tell us what prompted the department to work on this regulation?
Well, Brian, this has been in development for, I want to say, 5 or 6 years at least. And it was requested by the Secretary of Department of Industrial Relations, I believe.
Yeah, the chief of Cal OSHA submitted a request to the Cal OSHA Standards Board to begin development of a regulation. Initially in 2013, resubmitted that request in 2014, and then it began moving in 2015. So it was something that the agency felt like needed to be at least initiated, and as I said before, early on, we were very deeply involved in a process that felt very consensus-oriented and seemed to be very much about, let's figure out what this problem is and let's figure out what we can do to actually deal with it. More recently, it seems to have been a little bit less consensus-oriented, and I don't really know why. But it just evolved around 2016 and has been sort of we keep talking and it's not evident that we're being listened to, so.
And if I could chime in on that also, you have a letter from us that was sent to the board. The very last page of it is proposed amendments that would actually resolve our concerns. And it's basically 2 parts. One is that the lighting should be required when the worker is actually doing the work, is present doing the work and at that location. And 2, that the lighting can be provided by either area lighting, personal lighting, or other means, whatever is most appropriate in that space. We view those as pretty technical amendments that would clear up any ambiguity and deal with the issue of mandatory area lighting where it's not needed, because the reality is that lighting doesn't actually provide any additional worker safety at all. And so, we think those amendments are pretty clarifying.
Yep, and to add to that, I understand, we have tomatoes we harvest 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Onions, that are harvested at night because it's cooler for the employees, and So there's a lot of, not just wine grapes, but there's quite a few other industries that are affected by this rule. So. Go ahead, Andy.
Two questions. What percent of the grapes are harvested mechanically, and what percent by hand yet? And I understand the hillside concerns.
I don't have that number, but I know that in Sonoma, there's a lot more hand harvesting than there is in the valley. It's geographic, it depends on what the wineries will accept. But it is statewide is predominantly machine harvested now, and more growers are moving to machine harvesting mechanization.
And then, I mean, in the last 5 years, how many workers have been injured as a result of inadequate lighting, so to speak, at night?
I can't name a particular instance where that has occurred, and the specific instances that the agency has provided in the course of this rulemaking activity, most of them have seemed to have been things that could have as easily happened in broad daylight as would have happened at night. They just happened to have happened at night. That's been one of our concerns about the way that this regulatory process has been handled.
So the statistics don't show an increase in employees getting hurt and this sort of thing?
We've asked the agency to provide us with some numbers that would indicate that that's the case, and none of those requests have been responded to.
And actually, one of our growers in Sonoma actually did a 3-year go back and look at all the injuries, worker injuries, and she submitted that in the public comment in response to the regulation, and showing that she has had not one work injury related to lighting at night, not one over the last 3 years. And I think that it is difficult for them to make a claim that lighting is causing problems, I think.
Bryce?
This affects all wine grapes. I guess I was going to say what percentage of wine grapes. I imagine it's all wine grapes, and then from President Cameron, it affects many other crops other than wine grapes. Is that right? It affects all wine grapes?
Yes, and it's not just harvest either. So it's any work at night, and it's not just wine grapes. It's irrigation work. It's anything at all that you're doing at night.
And is this strictly a safety issue, or is it an urban ag interface issue? The issue of putting a light up in Monterey, is that an urban ag interface, more of a light noise concern? And
So-
is that actually in this reg too?
Monterey County has an ordinance that applies across the board, not just to ag, but applies to any residential use, any development, any outdoor lighting at night at all in Monterey County. And it's just a very strict regulation. They don't want any bleed over lighting. They don't want excess lighting. They enjoy their night darkness.
That doesn't.
I also say it,
that-
sorry.
That doesn't, though, come into play under this new OSHA reg. The OSHA reg's a strict safety. Is that right?
The intent is to deal with what is thought to be a worker safety issue. But the things that the agency is contemplating requiring agricultural employers to do will have an urban ag interface impact. We want to be good neighbors. We always want to be good neighbors, but it appears that there are going to be places in counties like Monterey where compliance with this regulation is going to cause problems with our neighbors, and none of us want that.
All right, no more questions? If not, maybe we can have staff meet with you and see if there's something we could do in the future, maybe for the next board meeting, if that'll work. Martha?
Is there any action happening in the next 30, 60, 90 days that would affect this, or?
It's hard to say because sometimes the agency and the board's regulatory processes are a little opaque. So I think maybe not, but it wouldn't hurt to get started sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and like I say, we know this affects more than just wine grapes, but it's particularly an issue in wine grapes. I agree with you. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention today.
Well, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to our first presentation this morning, U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, Erin Fitzgerald. Erin serves as CEO of the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. She is passionate, which we definitely know, and encouraging contagious collaboration about the future of sustainable food systems of the 21st century. She previously worked in dairy, where she led a voluntary carbon goal, innovation projects, and sustainable supply chain framework. Erin has been recognized in Chicago's 40 Under 40, a White House champion of change for sustainability and climate smart agriculture, and an Aspen Institute First Movers Fellow. She loves to cook and believes in purpose-driven business models. And what was it, the Sustainable Dairy Princess? Sorry. No, welcome, Erin. Good to see you again. We go back a ways, so good to have you here.
Well, thank you, Don. Really appreciate it. You were the first person that welcomed me when I came to U.S. Farmers and Ranchers, and Secretary Ross, when we were starting our dairy sustainability efforts way back, invited me out to the wine growers, and it was the best conference I'd ever been to, because we got to talk about wine, cheese, and sustainability. So it was a geek fest for two whole days. And just been following your career ever since, and we've been helping each other on this mission of sustainable food system for a while. And I see Mike and Ashley, who will know me as well from my dairy days. So I have been really excited to come speak with you. When I, as I mentioned, was with the dairy sector, it was about just herding a lot of the dairy sector together to work together actually across all the different co-ops, all the different acronyms in every single state, that we could really be together as a dairy sector and take on sustainability and climate change as really the #1 strategy. And for a long time, I had been thinking, as I had watched the first decade of sustainability, we now have 12 roundtables really working on supply chain efforts by each commodity, and we really needed a 2.0. And at the same time, the board of U.S. Farmers and Ranchers was a startup as well, bringing all of agriculture together for the first time. And I got this call, and it was like, okay, this is my dream job. And now more than ever, we need to have all of agriculture really working together across all boundaries. So, what you see here is we believe that every farmer uniquely enables the sustainable food systems of the future and unlocks that potential through every acre, but it's going to take every voice to make that happen. And so we say we want everyone here at this dinner plate. It's not just, sometimes in agriculture we hear this, we want to be a seat at the table. Well, the best way to do that, maybe because I love to cook, is to set the table, right, and have that shared dinner conversation about what is the sustainable food system of the future. So, and I think there's never been a more important time than now to really bring all of agriculture together. This past season, we've seen what I call sprinter, which was when winter moved into spring and did not let go. And in the Midwest in particular, it wasn't just one harvest loss, right? It was 2 harvest loss. Many of those farmers that put up their grain bins. In California, you guys have been living this as well, and I would say even on all these sustainability movements, you have been almost ground zero for a lot of these conversations for so long. But now we're seeing the rest of agriculture really starting to really understand the implications. And agriculture not only is the sector that can be the solution on climate change, but it's also the one that's really the first responder, the one that's really seeing this. And we are losing 175 acres of farmland an hour. So for me, I always look at that, is that our American rainforest? Is that our carbon sink? Is that our flyways? Is that our places where birds and pollinators go? And then also there's incredible potential. We are currently sequestering 100 times more carbon emissions in our soils than are currently emitted in the United States in a given year. And that untapped potential that lies in our soils, I will often say, this is the greatest challenge of our time. It's like going to the Mars or crossing the Earth, or for the first time, the oceans, that it's that level of clarity of understanding what is here. It's not just, it's an earth shot, right? It's really understanding this untapped science that is truly there. And I don't even think we all really realize and are unified around agriculture's untapped potential to not only just have a carbon footprint. We are the only sector that can have a handprint. We're the only sector that can actually solve, do drawdown, and contribute in our communities contribute to nourishment. We do a lot more, and even more than all these environmental stats, I'm betting on a people-based movement. When I look around to all the goals that are being set on the Sustainable Development Goals, and I look at, I've worked with many business leaders on sustainability that are setting sustainability goals, and then they go back and they have to teach employee culture change management on purpose-driven businesses. We are the only sector that, as a culture of a people, have these values called stewardship, the values and commitment to leave the land better for the next generation. And sustainability, well, that's about putting your values to work day in and day out, making the tough economic business model work, no matter how hard it is, this last economic season probably being the worst, and trying to line it up for community and planet. That's what agriculture is. And I say agra as a culture, dash culture. And we are that people-based movement, and we, I think, are the sector that can go solve climate change. And I really want agriculture to be able to step up and start getting not only the recognition for the potential that's, but also the economic investment that goes along with being a solution for climate change. So our vision is that we believe that farmers and ranchers uniquely enable the sustainable food system in the future. And as a mission, as an institution, we are an organization that will connect farmers and the leaders in the value chain and multi-stakeholder process to actually co-create the sustainable food systems. And that word co-creation you will see quite a bit in what I talk about. We have over 75 partner and supporter organizations. We changed our governance within the first 90 days last November, and we're currently in the process of moving to an actual 501c3 to absolutely ensure a complete multi-stakeholder process. And you'll start seeing in the top left, I'll talk a little bit about some of these other folks that are coming to the table. But in the inner circle is our board. It's the farmer-elected leader of each commodity group. And then we have, throughout all the different commodity groups, our ambassadors and volunteer networks. We're working to get the rest of the stakeholders, but this is really agriculture saying, okay, we're here. How can we now start engaging the rest of the value chain? You can see Culver's, Joe Koss, the CEO of Culver's, was the first CEO that stepped up to join our efforts. So there are over 75 farmer groups in 34 states. You will note there's one state in here that represents 1/8 of agriculture that has got to get into the Hive. And you guys have been leading the way. And I know you have incredible change agents here. You're forward thinking. I read the vision report and just, I'm just saying ditto. How can we get a lot of those efforts and visionary statements into this broader collective U.S. agricultural movement? It's about 1.6 farmers. We have 150 active farmer leaders. These are leaders that I would say, and Don's one of them, that really can work and get on a panel and can talk to a brand and or talk to a farmer about what these impacts truly mean, getting out of a 70-degree and fluorescent sunny conference room and taking those metrics and making it real. And then down in the bottom is 100 new organizations that are participating in really driving a compact or a decade of agricultural commitment to sustainability. I'll talk a lot about that. So we have 4 key pillars. The first is science sense. So this is really making certain that we truly understand agriculture's role in climate change and ecosystem services. There is so much work being done by many different agricultural groups, but there's a lot of missing gaps in this information. And can we co-op some of this science together, or at least have a strategic planning of what science needs to get done? And most importantly, the reason I call it science to sense making is because quite often many leaders will actually quote the wrong environmental impacts of agriculture. I was at the Wall Street Global Food Forum, and 4 of the 10 CEOs on stage quoted the wrong environmental impacts of agriculture, and they're in agriculture. And so, I kind of said, well, if we don't have a shared sense of what is today, there's no way we can imagine the future. So it's really about getting and curating the right information so we can start to take action. Farm table is the second major pillar, which is really about making certain that we do have farmers and ranchers at the table. literally in conferences, in boardrooms, working in all of our working groups that the farmer voice is represented. And then Food Hive, you will see I'm big into symbology, but the strongest structure in nature is a hexagon. In fact, it hates individual entities and will always collapse and find shared walls and shared synergies. And therefore, you'll say, get in the hive is kind of our phrase, or we're hiving, means we're actually collaborating. And each entity and each communication group can have their own communication platform, but what are the days that we're working together? When are we doing, in digital terms, a thunderclap when we're saying, thank you, all of ag? You know, we can certainly celebrate Blueberry Day, or, you know, bigger issues that we're all working on together, rather than the sum of our individual parts, or the parts. And then you could say that the ones on these first three are what we call basic blocking and tackling of collaboration, working together. But the one on the right, Food 360, is about actually leading and working on the next decade of leadership. Apart from this organization, I have not seen a strategic plan out of agriculture or the food sector. In fact, where would you go find it? Is there a place that the food CEOs actually meet with the agricultural CEOs? Nope. This is our startup. Is literally to get these groups to work together on the greatest challenge of our time. So, so for science, we have a series of science councils where we just published a report called the Ecosystem Service Report, where in there is all the great facts. Many of the top scientists were saying, go pull this out of the FAO reports, go pull this out of the National Academy of Science, and make it easy. We're in food, so I say bite, snack, meal approach. A bite is this little great infographic. A snack is a one-pager that can be used for training or making sure we're all getting this. And then the meal is really the very detailed report of the best science all in one place. And the intent here, this becomes a platform for training, for communications, and also just shared understanding, almost like a resource center. The other big thing that we are working on is, again, co-opting, for lack of a better cooperation, of metrics. So there are 12 different roundtables. We got a grant to go review those, and I had lived that with dairy. And we interviewed 45 brands on the state of supply chain metrics. And this will be coming out, I think, actually today. It's being launched Tuesday or today or tomorrow. That really says that it's time to work together. If you imagine the two places where metric convergence needs to happen, if you're Nestle and you're making a lean cuisine, you know, it's a panini sandwich, you've got chicken, you've got cheese, you've got some peppers, all of that would have to be into a lean cuisine supply chain standard. But now there are at least 12 different things you'd have to go reference. And when it comes to a farmer, I think of Brad Greenway, my past chairman, who's both a pork farmer, beef farmer, and he's, you know, commodity row crops. So would he do 4 scorecards times the amount of brands that he's serving to? Absolutely not. So actually, the farmer and the retailer and the brands have a lot more in common to actually drive this convergence. And we also got a grant to then look at the science that underpins these metrics. So when I was at dairy, there were a lot of scorecards going on related to supply chain metrics. And we did the due diligence with what's called a life cycle assessment to then look at a sensitivity analysis and said, well, what impacts drive both economic and environmental performance? And it turned out there was 25 variables that drove animal care, environmental performance, and economic performance. And if I showed a farmer those same variables, those, and I didn't talk about sustainability, those would be the variables that they're driving. So immediately, because we found 25 variables, it cut the chaff of the 150 questions that were being asked from Unilevers and the like. I said, use these variables because we can now get resonance and pick up for that, and also helped hone in on training. So we're starting this work. Walton Family Foundation has matched some of the investment for this. It's really exciting. And then we have a first mover pilot of 3 groups. You will see everything we do, we require not just one commodity to step up. It has to be multiple as part of our governance. So we force a little bit of the collaboration. So we have a pilot now being announced with corn growers, soybean board, and the pork board. And that would basically translate, if you've heard of field to market, and the We Care program and start getting these metrics to talk to one another. In terms of farm table, this is really, we're actually hiring for this position. You might know of a rock star, but we really want to make certain our farmers are at the table. We were just in California filming. That's Steve Maddox, you might know. We want to get more friends on camera. We're creating a lot of digital shorts, really making certain that we are able to translate very quickly what some of these topics mean. And we're putting farmers in places they've never been before. We were the first organization that went to South by Southwest and try to make certain, yeah, I know you've lived this. And we just were at Food Tank and some of these places where farmers usually are not asked to participate. We want to make certain that we create a shared, inclusive dialogue. And then on the bottom right, because we're building all this science fact base, what we're finding out is that many of our brands, many of my colleagues in the sustainability world, it's like, hey, congratulations, you're the sustainability expert. You're in charge of employee engagement, supply chain reporting, communication, et cetera. It's too much. And they have to do culture change. Well, we brought, Joe Koss, CEO of Culver's, piloted this first project where we brought the barn into the farm. They put on digital goggles and got to get on some farms. And then we had farmers from all the commodity groups call into the conference room where the employees could ask any questions. And again, part of the theory of change here is making certain that we in food and agriculture own this topic first. Everything we're doing is a little bit about employee change management. We're 2% of people who farm today, but if you add up people who are truly could speak to this issue and own this issue, if you think about all of our employees, that's 15% of the American workforce. So that is a massive consumer target if we just get ourselves working on this. So here's a little bit of our farmer ambassadors. Dunn is one of those. We would love other change agents that you know about. And I'll tell you a little bit how this is transforming.
To be honest, I don't know where to start. I was 6 when I knew what I wanted to be. You're only 2 now, but sometimes, I swear, I can already see it in your eyes. It was your granddad who got me into it. Put me in charge of my own acreage at 16. Boy, I had so many ideas. Heck, I was pretty confident about what I was doing. The innovations, truly becoming more and more sustainable. I felt like I was on a mission. And if I'm really honest, I still can't fully wrap my head around how it didn't work. But now we're here at a point where continuing just doesn't make sense anymore. Your mother and I are selling the farm. Every single acre. We talked to the bank and the realtor. It's going up tomorrow morning. And we're just gonna move to the city because it'll be a brighter future. And I want you to understand why. It's not just the drought getting worse every year. We were working to stay ahead of that, but costs keep running up and prices keep going down. Then one day you wake up in a place where one bad season can knock you and everyone you care about right over. And that's not a good place. I worry about how much we've invested out here. And at the same time, I can't help but think about what that investment brought us. It used to be nothing but desert here, and now there's so much potential in the soil. But it seems like nobody cares. And that's why we're leaving. I don't want to plant a dream in you, only for you to find out later that it's not a living. And that people don't understand, or worse, they don't care. They just blame everything on you. And you start losing your pride. And that's no life. The farm is everything to me, and I want you to know that. But my family means even more. So everything that I do, in the end, it's gotta be for you.
The debate over climate change. Does agriculture have a seat at the table, and are we a part of the problem or part of the solution?
Oh my gosh, I think that we are the solution to climate change. We have not had the conversation that we actually can offset carbon from the fossil fuel sector. And we are cycling carbon. We are biogenic carbon, very, very different from fossil fuel-based carbon.
The potential answer to a lot of our issues is right beneath us in the soil. We've been farming for centuries, and we're just now really learning about the ability of the soil to not only hold water and nutrients, but also sequester carbon and improve our environment. I'm inspired every day by our peers. We monitor our soils with GPS, and we know to the point how to manage our soils.
That's really something, isn't it?
Holding capacity, increase crop productivity, and increase carbon sequestration.
They're superheroes.
Our time is now, but we only have about 30 harvest cycles left to get it right. That is more important now than ever. I see the future is bright. We focus every day on
Let's go home.
Yeah.
It's a very exciting time to be in farming because we will be one of the first industries to have a negative carbon footprint.
So this concept of 30 harvest and agriculture's role, I mean, if you think about any other sector setting goals on climate change and carbon targets, you know, it's a linear trajectory. But agriculture, we have a chance each harvest season. And the scale and the potential that we can offer is unprecedented. So this is all about starting to create a shared dialogue with farmers and the community of agriculture's role in being a solution, but also the fragility and the economic reality that is happening. We already are at to 1 million views, and we launched this on August 15th. This is an easy support effort. You guys, we have had Nestle do an employee showing, like they're doing luncheon views, anything you can do to get really the conversation started on this. But the intent is really to create that shared dialogue. And the other thing about this film, there's a couple things that you'll see that will be themes throughout what we do. While this was a docudrama to grab people's attention, it's real. 2 weeks after filming, Megan Kaiser, the soybean farmer, who's also a soil scientist by training, was hit by the Mississippi flood and could not get into her fields to August 15th. Jay, who farms in New Mexico and Texas, was hit by 2 tornadoes 3 weeks. Nobody's going to want to get on film with after this, but it's real. And so we started doing, the filmmaker was so intent on this, we did a lot of outtakes for learning on what does carbon smart farming and adaptive and resiliency mean. And it's now becoming a series of videos unto themselves. I would just say we expect more to come on this. We've had filmmakers even start reaching out, how can I help? So this, I would say, is more of a volunteer call to action. You'll also see the theme of heroes. So Megan is, this is based on X-Men. Megan is the doctor that's really recognizing that these heroes, our farmers, have these untapped hidden talents that society doesn't recognize. And Jay is really Wolverine out in the fields, and she's calling him back to action. So it's a subliminal storytelling that we're using just on the power, and we believe that our farmers are these hidden superheroes that, if called to action on this topic, could really solve. So Food Hive, this is about really making sure that all the communication professionals in agriculture can work together. They have biweekly conference calls where they work on messages and making sure that we're getting the information out there, and best-in-class content. We've launched a podcast for business professionals. You might know world-class leaders that should be on it. It's targeted to a business professional. It's in food and agriculture. 5 minutes hearing about a topic on sustainability to improve business acumen. 5 minutes learning about the top trends that are in this space, and then 5 minutes hearing directly from a farmer what these topics mean on their farm. In 20 minutes on your commute, you can kind of stay current on issues. We have also, we're in the midst of partnering with Meredith and Hartman Group to create a digital destination for all of this content. Meredith, if you don't know them, they are basically sixth. They're well known for Better Homes and Garden. They started out with successful farming, actually. And so their mission statement is to make our farms and homesteaders better for the next generation. So when we met them, we felt like this was a natural fit across all their different organizations, and they're going to be basically helping us create the power of the stories and the facts, but in a usable information that people can actually read and start to get to understand. So the way to think about the Hive is about really creating that culture change movement around some of these topics. And then Hartman Group is really the key insight group that most of the brands use. And this will be providing intelligence to many, probably, I would say at least the checkoffs and agricultural groups. In the first 90 days, I went to every single agricultural commodity group, and I was already up to $20 million being spent on consumer insights. I'm like, guys, we all know there's a lifestyle, health, and sustainability. Like, can we help get a shared body of intelligence, and then you could spend your dollars more effectively on action. So again, thinking of us as more of a cooperative that can help with comms. And then Food 360, this is really what gets me excited in hearing about your vision. In June, we brought together 100 C-suite leaders for the first convening. Ashley, you remember this when we were in dairy. Nobody thought we could pull this off. And we partnered with the Aspen Institute and said, you know, it's time is now if agriculture really wants to plan for this next decade, and we better do it in a multi-stakeholder fashion. We brought the first time the 3 secretaries of ag. We had Vilsack, Glickman, and Purdue in a room. You can see this jovial laugh. Everyone was kind of just taken aback that they were all there, ready to roll up their sleeves. And we are starting to create a vision for 2030. So many of these people hadn't met before, which is amazing to believe this. And now we have 9 working groups taking action. So this might look like Pollyanna or you know, some cartoon drawings, but it's the stories and the working groups behind this that are becoming impactful. So first of all, this idea that maybe we could even be a solution to ending climate change is new news. And you'll see here in the middle, there's this like virtuous food cycle. How do we enable co-product utilization, byproducts to co-product? How do we create a virtuous food cycle in agriculture where it's nutrition and then nothing becomes waste? And we had the head of Feeding America there. I'll draw your attention to the top left. There's this little thing called bio-based markets. We had, I won't give the names, but the head and founder of the ethanol industry there. We had the head of Patagonia and also former EPA director, and then we had the head of the regenerative ag movement. And at one point, they're kind of all talking, and at some point you feel like a camp counselor where people are coming up to you afterwards saying, oh, I don't know if that person really believes me. I'm like, well, you can go back out and tweet past each other, get in there and go fix it. And So all of a sudden, they realized that there was a conversation like, don't we want everything to come from the surface of the earth rather than the inner of the earth? And they put this word up here, bio-based markets, and it just created a whole shift in the conversation about thinking about integrated food systems, fibers, fuels, and food. And this is a body of work that we plan to have completed in next June. We have 9 different working groups. Our goal is that by 2020 of June of next year, that all these working groups, and you might have other stakeholders as you're thinking of this that would be impactful to this multi-stakeholder work. We plan on having 300 leaders now at this one to sign on to this vision and compact. And then there'll be roadmap projects or action networks to get there, and then launch that at September of Climate Week in 2020, what we're calling a Decade of Ag. Fun stuff. As a result of this as well, we signed a partnership with USDA MOU, and Karen, you'll appreciate this, obviously. I didn't know this either, that USDA doesn't actually have a mandate to promote agriculture, and so this gives us an opportunity to work across the different sectors in partnership to unlock both, NIFA, ARS, ERS, NRCS, and so for a lot of those projects coming out of that working group, we now have a mechanism to work directly with USDA. And then one of the projects coming out was, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of names for this, but it's called EarthShot 2030, or Rapid Climate Response, very similar to how the healthcare sector set a goal that we want to end cancer, and they set up the Human Genome Project to unlock scientist, doctor, and patient relationships to provide data. This would be doing the same thing in real time. Foundation for Future Agriculture Research, if you don't know them, they are like the National Institute of Health for Agriculture. They are our partner in this, and then we also partner with World Farmers Organization, and we've applied to the MacArthur Challenge, 100 and Change Challenge. It's a $100 million award, and we're also looking to crowdsource funding just for these projects with a lot of foundations. So there's some big projects coming out of that. Another one that might be interesting is not just on science, but it's creating transformative financial investment. There's a series of just 12 really rock star financial institutions that want to look at, okay, if we're going to announce this big goal, as similar to the UN did, they announced a $2 trillion capital transformation needed for goal number 2, related to the Sustainable Development Goals. What is the United States target investment goal that we need to make? And so that's a whole body of work. We just received a mini grant to go do that, and we're in conversations to match that, so that by next June we also have an economic goal attached to this. So there's several ways you guys can help. One, just being an individual ambassador of change. And the other would be, I would say, 30 Harvest. Anything you can do to promote it with your employees, on your site, any one of your groups. Start a discussion, put it on your website. Simple things, too, just linking to websites actually improves Google algorithms. So, it sounds simple, but just putting the right facts and information and sharing it actually helps improve. So things like that, actually, you might seem like small or huge overall. You could also become an organizational support member, and you also might know key brands or retailers or other NGOs that could be part of this. Anything that we can do to connect different people is clearly one of our asks. So I'll just stop there and take any questions. I'm very excited by the work that you guys are doing. You have been truly leading in this effort of this vision for agriculture, and now I truly do believe it's the time for all of us to work together. We have 30 harvests to get this done, and time is now. So, welcome to questions.
Well, Erin, thank you. Really great presentation, moving and fantastic to see where you're headed with this. It made me much more aware of what you're doing, and I've been involved. So I think it's great. But yeah, I know you talked about South by Southwest. I had no clue when I went there and spoke, and wasn't sure if I had any really effect on people, but at the airport when I was leaving, somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you were the farmer on the panel."
Farmer.
And they were from Denmark, and it's like, oh, we support everything that you're doing, and I mean, really enjoy. I mean, I was kind of surprised. I was taken back. So, anyway, we'll open it up to questions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Aaron, that was really very fascinating and hopeful. I'm wondering, way outside the box, if you have any data on what they call field greenhouse growing.
I do not, but maybe you guys do. But like,
The only example I know is in Iowa, Fairfield, Iowa.
yep.
They have a 3-acre greenhouse. It's been in existence about 14 years, and they're supplying 10,000 people 30% of their calories.
Well, that would be great. I mean, when we think about all of agriculture, we do think about urban. We and aquaculture participated. I mean, it's all hands on deck, and we think about it as an integrated food system. So I would love to, if you have a good case study on that, it'd be great to get.
Thank you.
So that was a fantastic presentation and really exciting, and knowing what you were able to do at DMI, and now you're the perfect person to lead this. So I'm jazzed. I am curious, what are kind of your biggest obstacles right now, both on the agricultural side and then the larger food community side?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is, one, our old reputation. So a lot has changed. I mean, the board has flat out changed this institution. So a little bit overcoming that. Second is we're startup. We have 7 people. We're hiring 6. We're at 3.5 million. So it's not, when you look at some of these agricultural groups, this is a small budget for the task at hand. So I would say resourcing is a big one. And then the third is in the farming group, my biggest concern is and this is where you guys will all come in, this is a movement. We've got to move fast, I think, because there's so many other people going. But how do we ensure that we are bringing the farm base along and that we are changing hearts and minds on this topic? This is not political. This is truly planning for the next decade. And it has to be farmer owned. So that's one of the things I mentioned. We're hiring that person, a farmer ambassador, and creating a farmer ambassador network. We got to figure out how do we get that storytelling farmer to farmer peer networks going. And these are words that have created worlds. We are purposely taking on the words that people don't necessarily want us to take on. We will use the word climate change. We will use the sustainable food systems. We will use climate smart agriculture. We're trying to explain all the differences of all these different words that people have used. In fact, one of the conversations we're even saying, do we say net negative or do we say climate positive? So just all these things. So I would say that's what keeps me up at night, making certain that we start launching this farmer to farmer network as well.
Thank you. So first of all, I discovered culverts in Arizona. We don't have them in California. And it sounds like you don't have any Californians on your board. Is that correct?
We would love some California
Maybe we
members.
could arrange some kind of a trade.
Love some California members.
Does everybody know Culver's? It's pretty amazing, like ice cream place. And it's like a upscale kind of fast food.
Yep.
But with amazing ice cream. So I guess it's rooted in Wisconsin.
But they
Everything,
do,
it's
if you don't know them.
This is not a commercial pitch here. I mean,
Yeah, but definitely check them out. They have integrated this whole aspect of Think of Farmer. Everything is connected to farming. Any employee can speak about farming. It's really amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool place. Anyhow, I was curious if, and I don't mean this to sound like an obnoxious question,
No.
and just for full disclosure, I work for Environmental Defense Fund. Ashley and I are the environmental reps on the board. Is this like your California version of your presentation that has climate change so front and center? But seriously, like how is the farm community responding to the fact that you have climate change in the center of your kind of mission document, and you were very forward about agriculture being a place for solutions to climate change when, it's a tough topic to talk about in places of the country. So I'm just curious your feedback on that.
So I think it's on every single one of our board agendas, this topic. And, a lot of you guys work with farmers and our farmers. You have to talk it out, and it has to be led by farmers. I think this conversation in particular, I go into a lot of conference rooms where people are saying what needs to happen on a farm, and there's not a single farmer in that room. And so part of it is asking the farmers to lead and understand it. And so that, it's not just about goals, it's about culture change, it's about ownership, it's about living our values. There's a whole bunch of other things that are part of this. And I would say more than anything, apart from the block and tackling, a lot here is about literally culture change and building on the culture and the legacy and the values of farmers. If I look at any other sector that could respond to climate change, it is this sector that can own it. And many of our farmers are actually doing it. It's just the words have been absolutely polarized. And, I think it has gotten into a political field, and I don't know if that's maybe because Al Gore started it first, and that's how everyone just didn't leave their head with that. But this is broader than that. This is about ecosystem services, this is about carbon, this is about community vibrancy. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. I will just tell you, if you look at the board, it's not your usual suspects, right? We have National Cattlemen's there. We have the first female elected leader to Cattlemen's. This is, if we're really going to make it work, if we really want to have collaboration on this topic, then we can't be afraid of the words. We have to teach, we have to enable, and we have to bring culture change about on the topic, bring science about on the topic, but make certain we're working with the grassroots farmers.
And Eric, I think, I think you're seeing a slight change to where growers accepting climate change, but they may not agree on the cause. I think you're seeing, we're on the front lines, and I think we're seeing what's happening. So, Joy, and then Harleen, and then Mike.
Thank you very much. Your film literally brought tears to my eyes. And I am wondering if we can have links to that in order to be able to, I'd like to post it on our website. And I'd also, and in newsletters, and I'd like to also bring in other forms of farming into the story. Grape growing is definitely on the forefront. There have been 2 years of summits in Portugal, and Barack Obama made a call that the wine grape growers of the world are the ones who need to lead, and of course that comes naturally. So, so speaking on behalf of certainly my colleagues in Sonoma County, where just this year we became 99% sustainable in grape growing, and I think we're the first grape region to do that. So first and foremost, I want to share your film.
That's great. And you guys might have other ideas for this campaign, and that's a way to lift up these stories. Appreciate that. Any help?
Helene?
I want to say thank you for the film. It was very moving. And when I think about that film, there felt to me like part of this issue is more than sustainability on the farm, but economic sustainability. And so I was really curious if you're going to be looking for banks to be players in this and other lending institutions, because it really felt to me like he was leaving the farm because he couldn't make ends meet.
Right.
And so that's where I felt like the real change needs to happen is how do we get better prices for farmers? Is that a policy issue? How do we educate the public not to go for the cheapest thing, So I'm just curious what you're doing on that economic sustainability.
Couldn't agree more. I might have glossed over because I didn't have a slide, but one of the big projects coming out of the forum is to set a goal related to economic development goal. And in that is some of the top 12 financial institutions. We're just now doing an RFP to figure out how we're going to get this done. but it's going to look at what they call transformative capital or just transfer of capital. It's like a huge ESG term right now. And, there's some really crazy stats related to ag economics right now. The average farmer is getting 7 cents on the dollar. It's the lowest in 28 years on record. Highest balance sheet on record. That's not necessarily what I would call a sector ripe for innovation if we're talking about this capital. Then you have all these episodic and extreme events coming in. That doesn't, bode well. Then you have this notion of heritage transfer happening at the same time as you have this aging farmer population. And younger farmers aren't necessarily, we're seeing increased leased land, right, related to agriculture. So how do you pay a farmer in a leased land situation? There's a report that just came out that said that agriculture, for just 1% change in climate-smart agriculture, would yield $226 million in societal value. So it's looking at all of these things. That's kind of the what is. But then saying, okay, if we need to, and I'm just making up the number 1 trillion, what would angel, or even I would say angel and foundation investment look like? What would traditional investment schemes look like? So a lot of the banks don't necessarily take into account cover cropping and the other fact. In fact, you can get penalized for that. Even though you're de-risking your business, insurance mechanisms, and then all the way up to institutional. So State Street is a part of this, and some of the other institutional lenders like BlackRock. How do you evaluate a Nestle, a ConAgra, and all of these things for their climate preparedness? So this report will be, I would say, a vision statement for economic transformation, and what needs to happen coming out of that, I would imagine, will be a lot of working groups, but it's literally just getting these guys in a room saying, this is the sector where there's a flight of capital, doesn't necessarily relate to innovation towards these big goals, what literally needs to happen. Because some people will interpret that, farmers are like, well, how did he get the money to come back to the farm? But the point of the story is to say, we need your help on the economics. I know. There is Hollywood in this, right? That's a great question. It's the most important question, actually.
Well, Bryce, I understand you have a question. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Aaron. Fabulous presentation. It's just incredibly challenging, right?
Yeah.
There's so much to do.
Right.
And the question I have for you is just, how will you know that it's working? Do you have a metric? You working with like Nielsen and the and kind of the big data gathering outfits, or is this more of a thing? This has to be done. It has to be done even if we can't measure it. We know this needs to be done, and it's got to work. Could you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. In terms of metrics, from a consumer perspective, since our target isn't really consumer, we're not really factoring that in. So the first target is obviously just the employees and farmers themselves. So it's really getting the stakeholder groups really working together. I think, a lot of agricultural checkoffs, because I came from one, and they want to just message their way into this. And they've spent millions of dollars. If I look at the budgets, $25 million just on social media campaigns. Again, we're a small startup. We are not going to do that. This is all about employee engagement, grassroots engagement. So for us, the first one is, can all these leaders get in the room? Can we even get these projects off the ground? Another key metric is matching dollar for dollar investment. So this kind of cooperative mindset. We're now at 7 cents on a dollar return for farmers. I want to get to a 10-to-1 match. And then the next is the amount of stakeholders involved and really working on these projects. So sentiment is, I would say, 3-4 years away. Looking at Nielsen's, it's kind of like the early work to really do the right work. But yeah, probably the other big thing is, like, if not now, then when is part of it.
I didn't. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Aaron. Interesting program. My question is there any involvement by the forestry industry? I mean, I guess that's sort of farming.
It is. We have not talked to them. I think they've done a lot of great work on insetting, and they've been living this, obviously, Ashley, you probably know for more than this, I have opinion, but at least 10 to 20 years on these topics, and we can have a lot to learn from. But they're currently not into this. But as we start thinking about this virtuous food cycle, it could be very well that they would be a good member.
And Martha, we're going to wrap it up with that, but
You asked the right question about the industry and the financing. I will recommend the regulators, FCA, the farm credit, and then the controller of the currency to be at the table. This year, there's $100 billion extra that is going to come into rural America after a 15-year push that we have been doing from a different angle, the minority angle. But the controller has decided that he was going to increase the banks to deploy $100 billion extra of the CRA money to support farming. And he comes for farming, by the way.
Wow.
The controller of the currency. And then the FCA, which the chief economist has written the whole loan packages format has been done from 100 years ago.
Okay.
So now they're starting to realize that they have to re-engineer these loan packages programs.
Yep.
And so I think that those two controllers are somebody that have to be at the table with you. And they're
I'm
only busy.
counting on you to make an introduction for
I
me.
know them
Awesome,
both, yes.
awesome. Okay,
No
thank
problem.
you, thank you. All right, thank you, guys.
so Aaron, I had one more question for you before you get out of here. I apologize.
No,
I'm
I'm
going to
seeing
shut
it.
off my iPad. It's making noise. So, we get a lot of people that come to our operation. We had Dan and we had a lot of international sustainability experts last week. Is there something, that we can engage these people when they come visit us that you might be able to provide? And then is there anything the board can do to support what you're doing? So those are the two things. And I know we're running late, but
No, on that first note, I'm more than happy to give information and anything you need with it coming on the farm anytime. So that's easy. Even a 3-slide or videos or anything you want, fact sheets, anything. And I will just say this: I know we need to do a better job on this farmer ambassador. Like I said, this is our number one goal. And then on the second, what you guys can do to help. Definitely, you might find other individuals, ambassadors, who can be part of this network. Exactly doing what Don just said. We need that help. Post 30 Harvest, link to our website, tweet, maybe your communication. And then depending on how involved you want to be, we need members. We need support. We need financing, or even connecting us to financing or connecting us to the right people. This is a network. It's only good if you guys, help and volunteer. And, LaDonna's here. We're definitely interested in getting your feedback and insights, because in California, you guys have been living this a lot longer than the rest of agriculture. So I appreciate it.
all right. Thank you again, Aaron.
Thank
Good
you,
to
guys.
see you.
Thank you. I'll be around. I'm staying
All
around.
right.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation will be California Agricultural Update from our friend Daniel Sumner from the UC Ag Issue Center. Dan Sumner is the Frank H. Buck Junior Professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at the University of California, Davis, and the Director of the University of California Ag Issue Center. He participates in research, teaching, and directs outreach program related to public issues facing agriculture. He has published broadly in academic journals, books, industry outlets. His research and writing focuses particularly on the consequences of farm and trade policy on agriculture and the economy. So, Dan, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Don. This is a tough act to follow, and I blame Josh. I got no movies, no stories, a bunch of numbers. I don't have any goals. I hope nobody cries. and it's nice to see friends here. I hope I still have friends when I'm done. This goes back a while ago. Secretary Ross asked me to think about the future of California agriculture, and so this is not an update of where we are now, and it's where we're going to be in 2050. And so when she asked me to do that, of course, being a sane person, I said absolutely not. I refuse. I can't do it. She talked me into it, and I was going to blame her, but then now she's not here, and it wouldn't be fair to blame her when she's not here to defend herself. So I won't do that. That wouldn't be right. I also thought she might be here to defend me for these projections, but that's not going to work either. She's off, she said, talking to the PPIC board, and you will hear the word water obviously mentioned several times when I talk about the future of California agriculture. So it's important that she's at a water event, and I'd be there too, frankly, if I wasn't here. Let me click through this as I go along. And I handed out a 10 or 12-page manuscript just as background that we're working on. So this will be a book. I didn't bring the hundreds of pages of background charts and graphs, et cetera, with me, partly because they're not done. We're still doing things. But I did want to give you a flavor and discuss with you folks where we think we're going. Obviously, California agriculture defies any quick summary. This isn't, I know I have colleagues that work at Iowa State. They say corn and beans, and then that didn't seem like enough, so they say beans and corn to get the rotation right. Obviously, eggs, beef, a few other little things, but that's not California agriculture. We are facing, so we've looked at lots of data, but you don't look forward by only looking in the rearview mirror. I think it helps you to know where you've been, and I'm going to show you some trends, but that's not where it ends. We also go back to what I would call the cost, or in economics lingo, the supply conditions, what's underlying the cost of production and where we're going on the supply side, and then the buyer and market fundamentals that do the demand side for us. Just to start with the bottom line, farm revenue and net incomes are going to continue to grow in California agriculture. That just seems, it's been going on for a long time. I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to change that. There will be lots of ups and downs and lots of changes, and some of them are fundamental changes. But we've seen really fundamental changes in the last 30 years, and we always, I think all of us always see the things that are right on the horizon seem like the biggest things we've ever dealt with, and that's always been true. So that's not new, the fact that we have big things just on the horizon. What we've seen is massive, I'm going to be specific to California in a global and national context, but what I'm talking about is California. Massive investments per acre foot in California agriculture, and a lot of that has encouraged us to move, where we could, move out of field crops. Because and partly that's due to low interest rates. So we like to talk about all this agricultural specific reasons. Gee, the market for almonds are growing, this, that, and the other. Low interest rates are a part of this. And if you look historically, I mean back a century or two, where you see spurts of investment in permanent crops in California have been during periods of low interest rates. And you just do the arithmetic, and that turns out. You don't wait 15 years for a full crop if you're paying 10 or 12% interest every year. A lot of what I'm going to talk about the Central Valley, but I am going to spend a little time on coastal agriculture, which is, I don't know, $15 or $20 billion worth. So it's a big part of it. Same with the cattle industry, which in a sense, most of it is the cow-calf industry in the state and the feeder cattle industry, which sort of runs on its own and covers 10, 12, 13 million acres of farmland. So it's an important environmental, ecological part of California agriculture, as well as $3 or $4 billion. Now, I have to say this, even projections that are wrong can be useful. And partly it's the process and thinking about it. And everybody here, and probably everybody here, has done strategic planning processes And once you finish with that, you say, well, the process was good. I don't know what I got, but the process helped me think about things, and that's part of what we're doing. So there's the farm income numbers, the gross cash receipts. These are gross numbers, and I deal with a lot of people. Part of what I do at the university is try to teach students there's a difference between gross and net, which and reporters, by the way, who tell me agriculture must be doing great. Look, $50 billion, and you say, wait a second, there's a cost side to this. And I drew a trend line through here just to show you how it's been going. And interestingly enough, you get to almost 90% of the year-to-year variation with a trend, which is to say there's been a very strong trend in gross revenue, almost 2% per year. But importantly, we sort of know what's behind that, and that's this investment, because this is gross numbers. I'm moving very quickly because you've got some things in front of you, so I'm just going to move along and what are the drivers on the supply side? What are the cost side of things at the farm that drive California agriculture? I start with farm labor, and the second thing I say is water. And for a broader audience, you need to explain that, and you have to go through it. I'm, frankly, more optimistic than most people about farm labor costs and availability. Obviously, it limits many crops. I grew up picking apricots, so and cutting apricots, so those are gone. The reason I'm optimistic is because I'm looking out 30 years. If you said 5 years, are we going to solve any farm labor problems in the next 5? Probably not. 30 years, I get optimistic about policy making, which is part of the immigration issue, guest worker sorts of issues, and also innovations. I'm working with really smart engineers at Davis. And the ones I like best are the ones that aren't the gee whiz guys. It's the guys that say, gee, can we make innovations working with biologists that adjust things on the margin every time and make workers more productive, because wages are going to rise. And let me say now, we all want wages to rise. Every farmer I've ever talked to said, God, I would love to pay people more than I do. But, I can't be the only guy in the valley paying $30 an hour. Obviously, I'm not here. That didn't do anybody any good if I'm not employing anybody. And so we want wages to rise. We want hired farm workers to make more money. How do we get to do that? And that's making them more productive, finding ways to make the people that are working more productive, as probably fewer and fewer people will be working, doing manual labor in the sector. Let me turn to, you'll hear the word innovation a dozen times, and certainly in what you read. Water scarcity, regulations, high prices, all of that's true for water. Some hopeful signs, and the positive thing for California agriculture that came out of SGMA, and there's lots of positive things for agriculture broadly, is to unleash the incentives, the same incentives that cause people to want to have subsurface drip and drip so that we only applied exactly what the plant used, meaning water tables have to fall in those cases because some years we can't even, so there's no recharge. Those incentives, given that people can now own that groundwater, that can cause incentives for dealing with it. You don't have any incentives for innovation for something you don't own. You just can't. That is the individual growers and the individual water resource owners. So I'm optimistic that will unleash some innovations that we haven't seen. It does mean that people need to own the water, not just this year and not just here, but someone who owns water underground has to have the right to gouge somebody 5 years from now. Because if you pull the plug on them, that's not a pun, but you can. The water won't flow, and the crucial thing is to have water flow to generate the value and the profits, etc. Climate change is intimately connected to water, and when we work on climate change, I work with Josue Medellin down at Merced a lot, and water, the economics, the climate change all go together. Less snow, fewer chill hours, changes in pests, all of these are concerns. How do we deal with it? The same way we've dealt with other things in California agriculture. We do research and development, innovation, adaptation, all of those things that we're good at. And remember, the climate changes are everywhere. So when I've talked to growers, I say, climate change in California, sure, that's important. It affects your farm. Climate change in China and India is also crucial because it affects your markets. Markets are global just like climates are global. And it's, again, it's comparative advantage. So you can say, well, are we going to be out of the rice business because climate's going to be tough on us? No, because climate's going to be tough on other people too, and people are still going to eat. So climate change doesn't mean people don't eat. That's sort of fundamental. The demand side is still with us. I'm optimistic that California regulations that respond to political demands and raise costs will also be flexible enough to allow farmers to adapt. And that's an underlying optimism here. Can you make sure that happens? And you know, the other thing I want to say is that California costs that are broad-based, like lots of our regulatory costs, can lower land prices relative to what we would otherwise do, but don't drive us out. People are going to eat. They're going to eat our stuff, which may get more expensive unless the land and the California climate can pick up and move. We still produce. And that's sort of that's the underlying economic principle here. I've said resilience requires innovation, and one of the things that I'm concerned about, like everybody in my kind of business is the public R&D base. Much of what we're going to rely on is private sector research and development. We always have. Increasingly, we will. Individual farms are large enough to do some of their own R&D, certainly their own innovation. They always have. But we do need a public base of science. And every bit of economics we've ever done on that, say massive rates of return. At the same time, in the last 2 or 3 decades, not just California, but globally, rich countries have reduced investments in agricultural R&D. Some of the poor countries haven't. So to their credit, the Chinese, the Indians, and others have expanded from relatively low bases. We haven't, and that's a worry. So I don't know what to say about labor costs. Mechanically harvested and pruned tree crops and vines have advantages. So think tree nuts. Other commodities like berries, olives, are also reducing labor intensity. That will continue. Where it can't happen, the commodity will just leave. It just has to. That's just a fact. And that's tough. And we saw some of the, that's an economic pressure that's just a fact. And either the grower adapts or that grower leaves and somebody else who will adapt is in there. We've seen, things like dry on the vine raisins probably kept an industry alive that wouldn't be here otherwise. Raisins used to use more farm labor than any other commodity in California. That's not true anymore. And labor is, of course, a part of the shift away from field crops. That's not to say that there won't be niche markets. So to the extent that some consumer, I gave a talk this spring at an event honoring Dolores Huerta out at Harvard, and the emphasis I made there is if consumers could be convinced to pay for farm labor directly, I paid my workers a lot more than somebody else, label that and get consumers to pay for it. Will that happen in a broad base? I don't see that on this horizon. It could. Will that happen for niche markets? Certainly. And in those cases, high-priced labor is not a problem. So I showed you an upward sloping chart. Here's a downward sloping chart. I don't think any of these are going to stay with linear trends. I don't see field crops leaving California. Rice is a great example of that. It's partly for soil cases and other things. It's also the location of where the rice industry is. Are we almost out of field crops in the southern San Joaquin Valley? Not quite, but we've been moving pretty rapidly in that direction with even alfalfa hay for the dairy cows now being shipped from the far north or Idaho or somewhere else. Silage is down, on and on and on. I'm going to get at the end, And this also, about 1.5% per year, with a percentage trend, it never quite gets to zero. That's the nature of that kind of a trend line. But will it continue to decline? Probably so. And what does that mean? By the way, that means more reduction in field crops. The easy parts we did. We did the barley, we did the cotton, we did a lot of wheat, and others. Now we're this interaction with the dairy industry is something I'll get to in a minute. On the demand side, local, national, global markets, they're all important. For California, we ship our stuff all over the country and all over the world, and that's just natural to us. Population growth is slowing. Global population numbers aren't really the key for California agriculture. We're not in the bulk commodity, the poorest people in the world eat our stuff. That's just not what we do. That's not even what we do in the grain business. We're at the high end of the grain business. People have to get the middle incomes to buy our stuff. That's the nature of California agriculture. So income growth means more important, and it's not so much income growth among the already rich. And when I'm thinking globally here, so middle incomes is $10,000 a person, and you get into that range, and you're buying tree nuts, and you're buying dairy products, and you're shifting to japonica rice, and on and on. The sort of fruits and vegetables become the sort of thing that people can afford, and temperate fruits and vegetables like we grow here. We also have a demand shift that I think is crucially important, where buyers, not necessarily individual consumers, but maybe the buyer, it may be McDonald's rather than the person who walks into McDonald's, is saying, we want to know how it's produced, where it's produced, and we're going to give you a set of specifications. And we just heard about that, where certifiers from a half a different outfits come to your farm and say, show me how you're doing it. I don't see that going away, and that's tough. That's hard. That raises costs. And California farmers are probably better suited at dealing with that than any place else in the world, partly because growers here are large, on average. And if somebody's trying to make a living on a few dozen acres, they don't have time to deal with 14 certifiers coming by every month to see how they're doing. There's exports as a share of California farm output. These are data that we put together, and with the support of the California Department of Agriculture, we've been putting together data like this for the last 25 years, ever since Ann Veneman was secretary here in California, in fact. And again, I don't see this continuing as a straight line forever, but we've increased the export intensity. How have we done that? We've done that with shifting to tree nuts, with rice. You think of the export intensive crops, and that's where we've moved in California. So there's the world population. Asia is peaking over this 30 years that I have. Where's the growth? A lot of the growth in the next 30 years is in Africa. Most of Africa will probably not be our market in the 30-year horizon that I'm talking about. The next 30 years, yes, California will be supplying food to Africa. Notice no particular growth in Europe, probably shrinking. North America, a little bit of growth, and Latin America, a little bit of growth. I love this chart. I don't have anything to say about it. I just like it. This is males and females. We're symmetric now because there's been so much less violence in the world in the last 30 or 40 years than earlier. Too much violence, but less than before. You can see those big shoulders there that get bigger and bigger going from 1950 to 2100 mean that in 2050, sort of right in the end, the first light yellow band, what that means is people getting older, a higher and higher share of the population at higher and higher ages, and people over 50, then over 60, then over 70 being big parts of the population. We've already hit peak baby. That is, the number of very young children in the world is declining already. A few years, the share of the population under 15 is going, the numbers under 15 are going down. Then the numbers under 25 are going down. And that's really unprecedented in world history. You know, maybe the Black Death in Europe did that sort of stuff, but nothing for a millennium. That has big implications for economic growth and where economic growth is going. You need a big working age population to grow. So a place like Nigeria had lots of kids. A place like Japan and soon China has lots of old people. And you need the young people in the middle, the sort of working age people. So this dependency on either age slows economic growth. And we're all thinking about where economic growth is likely to happen and where that means where the markets are because where incomes are rising. And that's crucial for thinking about the future of California agriculture. There's the income numbers. The U.S. at the top. I show South Korea going in just a 30-year period, less than 30 years, going from $10,000 per capita up to over close to $40,000 per capita. That's the kind of growth rate that China's been on, but not with 50 million people, with 1.3 million people or billion people. India is now on a rapid growth path. India has now high enough incomes that a big chunk of Indians are middle-class people. Probably more middle-class people in India are middle-income people that can buy our stuff than in Europe. I mean, it's remarkable when you get to these big places. You know, you can have an odd 100 million there or 100 million there that can dominate demand. And so those are places that we're watching. That's why things like Indian walnut tariffs were such a bad, which jumped up in the last year or so, are such bad news for. You don't want them to get used to doing that kind of stuff. You want the. It doesn't matter if these markets grow if they're not open, and you got to have the market access. We achieved a lot of that in the 1990s. They've continued to open until the last couple of years. And this is not a talk about trade policy. I do those a lot. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about trade policy, other than having markets open are crucial. And that really, that's a policy matter that mostly just means get out of the way. Allow governments to get out of the way. People trade, it's natural. So here's the bearing acres of tree nuts in California. We're up, this is bearing acreage, which is less by 2017, which is the last full year data I had when I put this chart together, is a little less than 2 million acres. If you put bearing and non-bearing acreage together, we're well over 2 million acres. Where's that going? If you had this chart, you'd plant not just all of California, but the whole West Coast in pistachios here. And that's not going to happen. That's a prediction I'll make. Will pistachios continue to grow? I'm not going to look at this chart and say, no, we've had the last year of growth of pistachios. Will there be limits soon? Yes, have to be. We know that. I have something on the last slide to say a little more on that. So, research limits will bind us before demand runs out. You look at global demand for tree nuts, and there's really no obvious limit there. Can the Australians do it? No. Chileans? No. So that means there will be demand-side pressure for California to demand tree nuts, and we're going to bump into some limits. And where and when, that's a question mark. Some of you know that. You're putting millions of dollars of your own money into that question. Here I say maybe 1 million more acres on the top of the 2 million we've already got. Is that possible? If I would have told you 20 years ago or 30 years ago that we were going to add 1 million acres of tree nuts, you would have thrown me out of the room and said I was nuts. I guarantee it. Let's turn to dairy. I'm only going to deal with 2 specific sectors, tree nuts and dairy. Dairy is still the largest California agriculture commodity by revenue. That won't be much longer. It wasn't a couple of years ago. It is again. 2019 is going to be a pretty good year for the dairy business in terms of prices and production. But notice we had remarkable growth, more than double the industry in a 20-year period, and then flat since then. And that's a matter of economics. It's a matter of the prices in the world, and I want to talk about why. Cow numbers are down. Milk per cow is slightly up, but most of the major dairy states in the United States now have higher milk per cow than California. That wasn't true a decade ago. When I started doing this chart when I got to California, California was 20% higher milk production per cow than any place in the Midwest. Now we're behind all of the Midwest, all of the significant dairy places in the Midwest, for good economic reasons. We didn't inherit a bunch of dumb dairy farmers. That's not it. For good economic reasons, partly shifting to more Jerseys rather than Holsteins, by the way. So in that sense, this is an odd number. 50 years of stellar growth. I only showed 20 there. But the past decade, I think, is new realities. And the global market is strong for dairy at low prices. So how does that happen? It's because other dairy farmers around the world have caught up with California in terms of their productivity. And they've done that by adopting, in the U.S. anyway, and a few other places, what I call California-style innovations. I don't have time to go into those. They've also kept their feed, labor, and other advantages. So if you go into the Midwest where they've got California dairy, style dairy, cheap land, corn and soybeans all over the place, and opportunities for alfalfa hay all over the place, it's going to be tough to compete when their wages are 20% lower than ours. So that means it's tough to compete. I don't see a lot of growth in the California dairy industry, and I see hay and silage, which is now around 1 million acres, down from 1.5, close to 2. I don't see that coming back. Don't tell Dan Putnam I said that. Dan's a good friend. He's the alfalfa specialist at Davis and really knows and cares about the forage industry in California. But I think this is realism for that industry. I don't see it going downhill, but one of our challenges is our processing costs have also gone up. You face a fixed price for commodities that you're processing. Processing costs go up. It has to mean farm prices, local farm prices go lower because you don't haul milk very far to be processed in a competitive way. So growth prospect, here's a case where growth prospects are clearly limited, at least best I can tell from now. What about the coastal crops, the vegetables, melons, etc.? Vegetable melons are all over the place. These are gross revenue numbers. You saw how well it fit nationally. Here it's all over the place. We had a jump back in the 90s and flat since. Why is that? It's a variable industry. Some of the vegetables in the Central Valley were low revenue per acre vegetables, still part of the vegetable industry. But the other thing is that berries have really expanded like hell. So what does that mean? That means more and more of the coastal valleys are growing berries, and for that matter, high-priced wine grapes. So when we think of the coastal California, I say start in Mendocino and go south to San Diego. And you see lots of high productivity crops. Labor is almost every one of those are high labor per unit of revenue. Not the high-priced wine grapes, as it turns out. Even though they use a lot of labor, revenue is so high for those guys that even labor doesn't get close to and the values of land are reflected in the prices. So any place where they're paying $300,000 or $400,000 per acre, it's not labor, it's not hired farm labor that's driving the economics. Let me talk about ranching and the wine industry for just a minute. Climate change may well be a good thing for the California ranching industry. You think of the less snowpack, which worries us here in the valley, is not bad news if we think about things in terms of animal unit months, and if you get an extra few weeks of being able to keep cattle on the mountains before you have to move them because of the snow, or you get into the pasture a couple of weeks early, and you get a little extra growth because there's more rain and less snow, and you go a little higher up the ridge, all of that means slightly more pasture for California. And this is not land that's going to be, there's nobody competing for this land or no agriculture competing for this land, and so I don't see and beef demand is growing worldwide. Not in the rich countries, we eat as much beef as we're going to, but in the poor world, as people go in per capita incomes from 10 to 20, they go from poultry to pork to a little more beef, and that's a lot of beef. And California is as efficient as any. It's a tough business, but our industry is as competitive as any in the cow-calf business. And I think I've said some things about the coastal valleys, so let me move along. I do think the water and climate concerns, which I talk about fairly substantially in this executive summary you have do require real innovation. I've been working with people in the coastal wine industry. You know, it's a real issue. If you've spent 50 years convincing the world that you are the place to grow Cabernet Sauvignon, and your climate shifts a little bit, and there may be some Italian variety that's more suited to you, how do you convince people to say, well, actually, it's not Cabernet Sauvignon, it's, you know, something else? And that's a challenge for that industry. How about new crops? We have to talk about cannabis and hemp. Those could turn out to be important in California, but what I always look like is what's unique to California about a crop. So when I have a buddy I just spent last weekend with from Saskatchewan. He's from a town called Indian Head. He's been growing hemp oil seed for a long time, and I have a rule: if they grow it in Saskatchewan, it's not our crop. Now, CBD oil may be different. Now, obviously, we grow some grain and we have some barley and there's wheat in California, but really, in terms of taking over California agriculture, we don't want to compete with guys who can, with crops that can grow places other than our unique Mediterranean climate with our stuff. And it's not clear that either THC cannabis or CBD oil hemp have unique features that are ours rather than Kentucky or Tennessee or North Carolina. I spent a decade in North Carolina, for example, and I haven't yet heard anything about those crops that on a widespread basis mean they're ours, not theirs, in the way that lettuce or celery or japonica rice are ours, not theirs. So how about chickpeas? And I mean this quite seriously. There's going to be some crop that's going to take off over the next 30 years that's going to be the pistachio growth rate. I wish I knew what it was. So we did a cost study at the Ag Issue Center last year on chickpeas. There's 10 or 12 million acres in California. We featured in the 2018 data book, right, Josh, saying it was a crop that had grown 37% from one year to the next. I think it went down 30% the following year. But could that take off? It certainly fits the modern diet. It's an animal protein. I mean, it's a plant-based protein. It's a Mediterranean crop. Everybody likes it. Almost everybody likes it. And if you look around people talking about recipes, you can do more than just canned chickpeas in your salad and hummus with chickpeas. Is it going to be a $100 million crop? Maybe. Is it going to be a $1.5 billion crop? Not with my money, but maybe. So let me finish. Rapid change is going to continue. Labor concerns and water pressures are going to increase, but that will unleash incentives, I think. I think by the time we get to 2050 and well before that, we're going to unleash incentives for dealing with water and dealing with labor more than we already have. I think California is suited for the trends where the key is anticipating complex consumer demands. Some of us make fun of our 20-year-old daughters who want to have this crop or this special way that this is done, but I don't see that changing. I don't see that changing in the rich countries of the world. So where are the future gains? I think it is from treating California as the unique place that it is. And it's not competing with everybody else who can do anything else. And there's a handful of places that'll compete with us. Chile certainly, maybe South Africa when they get their act together more. Australia's kind of maxed out. I was with the California dairy industry in February. And it's just hard to see where they're going to expand rapidly. And they're small like Chile is. They're sort of around the coast this way, whereas Chile's long and skinny, but there's the potential for them as well. Could the Middle East compete with us in ways that they haven't yet? Maybe so. Could Iran and Turkey get their act together, and North Africa? Maybe so. But I think that's the kind of competition we're talking about. Governments can help. This board can help by support for investment that firms and farms can't do. R&D kinds of investments that firms, infrastructure that firms and farms can't do by themselves. And then setting rules that allow firms and farms to adapt. And that's it. Sorry for the longer program.
No, Dan, that was great. Yeah, I remember when the almond industry hit £1 billion, thought, oh, it's over. And now if you don't have 2.5 billion, you're short. So,
Yeah.
and we know that's going to continue to change. And like I say, we see a lot of pistachio acreage going in down our way. So,
Yeah, there's still, I mean, we haven't yet gotten to the point where the big plantings from 25 years ago are being pulled, or 30 years, you know, so there were some big plantings there are going to be pulled, so that we're going to get a period where it's good, you know, it's harder and harder to expand the footprint. But
I
people
agree.
are looking all the time. When I was up in Glenn County here this weekend, people are pointing to places and we've all seen this. Somebody points to something and says, well, that wasn't almond ground. What's remarkable to me is when 25-year-olds tell me, oh, that can't be almond ground. You know, it's not the 55-year-old guy, it's the 25-year-old guy. But it's still happening, and at some point, you know, as I say, could we do 1 million more acres? Yeah, maybe.
yeah, I've got one question, then we'll open it up. You didn't talk about farm size, but where do you think will be farm size on, I know you talked about niche
Yeah.
crops, but
Yeah,
2050.
and frankly, I think a bunch of very large farms do plenty of niche stuff. So you get over to the Salinas Valley and you'll find some pretty big guys that are hard to compete with in niche things. And that's one of the niche for them. So a few hundred acres, which for a moderate-sized farm would be a massive investment. I see it gradually increasing. I don't see anything to change that. I do see a remarkably positive, development that has been true forever in California agriculture, and that is capital coming from outside of California agriculture, allowing farmers to do what they do, which is farm, putting some of their own capital in, but drawing capital from outside. So a substantial amount of the risk is diversified with the rest of the economy. And that's a positive thing. A lot of people worry, they say, oh, gee, the outside money's coming in. You know, it's just hard for me to see how agriculture, if you're trying to buy a piece of property that looks like it's worth $20,000 an acre to you, and somebody from Allstate Insurance comes in and wants to pay $25,000 for it, well, you'll shake your fist at it and say, you know, to heck with outside money. But for the sector as a whole, that's probably positive. Some of that money is stupid and we'll lose. You know, that's true. But in general, I think that's a positive development. It also allows innovations. The same with outside money investing in agricultural R&D and innovation. I think that's really positive. Some of those aren't going to work, of course. That's what innovation means. But some of them will.
Okay, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Joy.
Thank you so much. I have to confess, I did not cry during this presentation.
Don't we talk about more about I could talk about the egg industry, and then you might cry.
So you started to answer about the investment for R&D. My question was going to be, where is that going to come from? But more importantly, how can we incentivize that from wherever it comes? And a second question is, in terms of the outside of California investment in agricultural land, some of that, and I don't know what percentage is for water, is to tie up the water. And I don't know if that is a positive or a negative. What is your view?
Yeah, so when I say, my friend Dan Dooley says you measure land by the acre foot, not by the acre. That is to say, land and water go together, certainly for crop-based California agriculture. They just have to go together. And no, I don't know any, there may be dumb investments, but I don't know anybody these days that's making investments in land. Nobody's dumb enough to make investments in land without having secure and reliable water to go with it. And maybe people have gone too far in that direction in some cases. So they go together. Does it matter that people are investing in water? I think not. I think that's a good sign. When you're going to grow a crop, if it's a permanent crop, you're going to have contracts that give you secure water. If you don't, maybe you'll be lucky. That's the best you could say about that investment. So do I want if I'm a grower, I've got plenty to think about. Do I want somebody else to put a few $1 million in investing in the capital and allow me to focus on the innovations on the farm? That strikes me as a reasonable proposition. It's been going on forever, by the way, and some of that has been money that wasn't successful. There are big chunks of land down in the southern San Joaquin Valley that used to be owned by a bank or by an oil company or on, and some of those people got it backwards. If I recall, it's buy low, sell high. Some people had it backwards. You know, that happens, and that'll happen again. But I don't see monopoly. I don't see people monopolizing land, and I don't see people monopolizing water, access to water. Now, there may be local aquifers where that's happening, but I don't think that's if I'm thinking in a broad brush about the future of California agriculture, that isn't what would worry me.
Dunn?
Thanks for the presentation. When you came up to speak, I was thinking in the 1980s there was a Davis professor that, I can't remember his name, that published a book on the end of California agriculture, but yours is much more positive than that one.
Yeah, you know, there's also a very nice piece that Alex McCall and Warren Johnston did on something like Wither California agriculture, suggesting in a reasonable way where it's going. Yes, Steve Blank's end of, it wasn't the end of California agriculture, it was end of agriculture. So he was not a nutritionist, I'll say.
But my question, not related to that, but you didn't talk about consolidation. I'm seeing, like in the valley, I'm seeing tremendous consolidation of farms, and small farmers are just, well, it's very difficult to compete. And can you speak to that?
Yeah, no, and I've my own academic work, a lot of it has been on farm size distributions and related topics. There's no question there are scale economies in lots of California agricultural commodities, and the focus I like to put on that is really a human capital point, which is very good managers and management systems are attracted to agriculture where they can do that. And one place you can do that, for example, is in the egg business, where you can have local managers run something and somebody else running the system. We haven't yet gotten there with dairy farms in a big way. It's harder to do with crop agriculture, but if you have somebody who can run several locations of farms, if they're the very best manager around, that will attract them. Let me tell you, the worst talk I ever gave was to a group of people in Washington dealing with dairy business. This is the summer of 1991. I was just a kid, and milk prices are the lowest they'd ever been, and a lady got to the mic and told about their farm. They had 40 cows. They were trying to make a middle-class living. They just had 2 sons come back from the University of Wisconsin, and they thought they were going to make 3 middle-class livings by expanding to 50 cows. And it was terrible. And her husband was frankly on the verge of suicide. I was in tears. The whole audience was in tears. And frankly, there were thousands of farms going out of business at that time. What's the reason Wisconsin is strong in the dairy business today is because basically they've gone 10-1. 9 of those farms are out, and the person that's left with 500 cows is smart as hell, really good, and very tough for California to compete with, and not making the income that a cow milker makes. Because the way I would phrase it, if you spend all day, say, milking cows, let me use that analogy, which is in California. If you spend your day milking cows and working in the barn, and you get home at night and now you have to think, you're just exhausted. I mean, people can't do that. And what that means, you make a living of somebody that's doing hard physical labor for a living. And you're going to lose out to the person who thinks for a living. And I think California, one of the successes of California agriculture is that we've had a period where people running agriculture in California spend all day, every day thinking. Now, they may be doing it on a tractor, and they may be doing physical work too, partly because it just feels right to them. But what they're really doing for a living is thinking. And That's what keeps us vital, I think, and that's what is going to allow our dairy industry to continue to survive. So that means consolidation, and it gets tougher and tougher. I remember years ago I was with some Korean farmers. Korean agriculture was not successful. We were up at a rice field day up in Biggs, and they saw, gee whiz, big tractors. They knew all that. We sat down at lunch with some women. That shocked them, women farmers. Turns out one of them was a school principal. The other one was a banker, and their ambition was to get into farming. They and their young husbands, these were 30-year-old women, and these guys had never heard of talented, smart people wanting to get into farming, that farming was the opportunity. And they weren't going to run little farms. These were people who had real opportunities. They weren't going to run little farms. They were going to run big farms, and they're doing it now. So I think farm consolidation is partly a matter of farm opportunity, and it'll continue.
So Ashley, you're going to be the last question.
I'm sorry for running on like that.
I have two.
No, it's fine. We're just, we're cutting into.
No, I know that.
We're going to cut into the next presentation after lunch.
I actually have two questions, but the one is, I was struck by, on your overview at the beginning, you said there'll be little change in livestock numbers. But then if you're predicting potentially a 1 million acre increase in orchards, I'm wondering how it squares for dairies. And maybe the livestock numbers and cattle ranching go up as the dairy goes down.
Yeah, so we've got about 1.7 million cows that we milk here. We ship our replacement heifers out to New Mexico or somewhere to pastures out there, and they come back when they enter milking. More and more of that'll happen. So the biggest land pressure, and water is a crucial thing here, is on alfalfa and silage. So we've still got 1.7 million cows like we had a few years ago, and we've gone from 1.5 million acres of corn and silage down to around 1 million. So what's happened? Hay comes in, and it comes in from Northern California and Shasta. Dan Putnam and I were talking about what does it cost to haul hay. It's a substantial cost, but we pay roughly, currently, we pay about 40% more for hay in the Central Valley of California than you pay in Idaho. So can that continue? Yeah, I think so. But it won't be, less and less of that hay will be local. You know, are there places down in the San Joaquin Valley where the land is just not suited for other crops, but forage crops do well? Alfalfa has the advantage you can turn off the water in the middle of the summer and turn it back on again in a short water year, keep the crop going, and maybe cut back to five cuttings from 8 or 9. There are advantages. I don't think it's going to zero.
So that actually plays to my second question. It's related, if I can squeeze it in, which is, with Sigma and orchards and the hardening of demand for water, I wonder did you factor the advantage that field crops have because you cannot plant them?
Yep, that's right. And in fact, you'll get down there a ways in issue number 5 or whatever I get to, making exactly that point. The ability to be able to fallow is important. Economists would never say the word hardening. I don't know, a geologist made that up or something. This concept that prices mean you buy just the same amount is what an economist would call inelastic demand. It's a term that's been around for 150 years. I don't know why the water folks wouldn't use it, but maybe because they want to talk about hard water. They enjoy that. But yeah, no, that's a very important point, and it's one of the things that may limit. So it's not just that you have access to water on some piece of ground that you say, gee, I'll plant pistachios there. It's the fact that it's got to be reliable and secure every year, not just most years. And that's a little different than some other crops.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. We always appreciate your input and your perspective on California agriculture.
And I appreciate your comments. I think everybody can find me. I probably have my email address on the back slide, but I'm easy to find. Or tell my dean and she'll get it to me.
So, Dan,
I forgot to blame Dean Dillard for this. If there's something you didn't like, she's the one.
Well, so you're welcome to, all of the speakers are welcome to join us for lunch. But I know that we had additional questions that, from some of the other directors here that would love to chat with you. So if you have a few minutes, that'd be great. Thank you again. We're going to take a break. We'll be back 1:15.